Good evening, Year 13, and croeso, welcome to the last presentation, which is on Unit 4, which is the Shakespeare unit. To start with, we just quickly revise and go over sort of what the expectations are for this unit. So as you know, or should know, this is worth 20% of your final qualification. So it's separated into two different sections. So you've got the extract and the essay. So you have one question based on extract from a play, and then you'll have one question based on the reading of one play. Okay. So the expectations for this is that you must answer one extract-based question and one question from a choice of two on the same text in section B. So what WJC state is that in both sections you will need to demonstrate your ability to analyse how meanings are shaped in drama texts, to be able to use accurately a range of literary concepts, so literary ideas and terminology, including knowledge of the principles and conventions of drama and dramatic verse. That's something that we're going to be addressing and having a look at today. Identify and consider how attitudes and values are expressed, organise responses in a clear academic manner with correct written expression, and use quotations, so textual support, references to texts and sources accurately as well. Okay. So section B, so in section B, learners will need to demonstrate their ability to show understanding of cultural and contextual influences. So AO3 is obviously being assessed here, and to be able to reflect on different interpretations of literary texts, including where relevant, critical interpretations, debate alternative ideas about a text and consider multiple readings. Okay, so where it states here, debate alternative ideas, I did mention, I think it was last week, the need to maybe use things like tentative language, so some may consider, others may argue. It could be suggested that a possible reading of this would be, so considering how other people may react to a presentation of a character, or possibly a theme that's presented throughout the course of the play. Okay, and here then we've got the mark schemes. Okay, so the extract, 40 minutes, possibly 45 at a push. Okay, with regards to the extract question, try and limit it to 40 minutes because it allows you to have an hour and 20 then for your essay, and obviously within that you get a little bit of time to plan and get your ideas together, because obviously with the essay what we have to remember, if you look at the mark scheme, is that AO1, 2, 3 and 5 are being considered. So you need to make sure that your AO3 and your AO5 are mapped quite cleverly and nicely and integrated into your AO2 points. Okay, and this is what we need to make sure of when it comes to your plan, that you've got that time and you factor, I'd say 5 to 10 minutes of planning to get your ideas organised before you start the writing of your essays. Okay, so here you're looking at the weightings. Okay, so the amount of marks per section, so section A is 45 marks, section B is 75 marks. So it notes here that both are closed book examinations. Okay, so look at the split of the assessment objectives, look at the different weightings of the assessment objectives. You really need to be conscious and aware of the assessment objectives and their weightings when it comes to your approach to the examination. For example, it's double weighted AO2 in section A, and then AO3 is double weighted in section B. But the issue with that is often what candidates do is they fall into the trap of putting more context in because it's double the marks. It doesn't work like that, unfortunately. What you just need to make sure that you're doing is you use your context and use it wisely, and that you make sure that your contextual references are linked to your AO2. So like I've said in previous sessions, the AO2 still needs to be that anchor and it needs to be the driving force. Task, text, context is the approach that WJC really like to see, and is something that I most definitely think is the most successful approach, okay, when it comes to these answers. Okay, so what we've got here is an extract from Hamlet. Okay, so this is around the length of the extracts that you'll have. So if you look at the question here, so with close reference to the language and imagery in this extract, so already it's gearing you towards the analysis. okay? Analyze how Shakespeare presents, okay? So what is he doing, okay? They want to see the how, they want you to be perceptive, they want you to take this apart, okay? Analyze how Shakespeare presents Laertes' attitudes towards Ophelia and Prince Hamlet. Okay, so clear question focus. All right, so his attitudes towards Ophelia and Prince Hamlet. Okay, so you're looking at the way Laertes speaks to Ophelia and the way he speaks about Hamlet. Okay, the reason I chose this is just looking at it on the page. The first thing that you'd want to definitely think about is the speech weighting, okay? Often there's a lot being said by just the way it's structured on page, okay? If you look at the weighting of speech, so Laertes has long sections of speech, whereas Ophelia has 2 lines within this section, and both of them are questions. Okay, so what does that suggest about him? Already we get the impression that he's possibly quite sort of domineering, a dominating character, one who wants to control, and she is one that's possibly uncertain, uneasy, not quite sure as to sort of how to broach certain subjects. So things like this are already being presented just in the weighting of the speech there, okay? Okay, and here what we've just got is the examples of the types of questions that may come up. So if we look at the directions and the instructions that are given here for the paper, so in your response you must show knowledge and understanding of the play you have studied, analyze the ways meanings are shaped, take account of relevant context and different interpretations which have informed your reading. Okay, so types of questions that are being presented here, okay, being put across. So, and as you can see, with regards to these, it's either or, all right? In the extract, you get one question, one choice, whereas in the essay, you get one, you can choose one or the other. So a sustained analysis of both the constructive and destructive effects of deceit upon those in power. Examine this comment, okay? So looking at deceit and power. In his presentation of Women in King Lear, Shakespeare inspires equal measures of shock, outrage and compassion in the audience. Examine Shakespeare's presentation of Lear's daughters, so looking at women. Play explores the tension between the politics of power and the power of love. Examine his film of Antony and Cleopatra, so looking at power, politics, control. It is in his presentation of the theme of duty that Shakespeare marks the greatest contrast between the different worlds of Rome and Egypt, so looking at duty, okay? In Antony and Cleopatra, and then if we just quickly look at the Hamlet one, destruction of family bonds throughout the play, which resonates throughout the play and becomes the key driving force of the tragedy. Examine this view, so looking at family and the lack of sort of togetherness. Presents Hamlet as having all the qualities of traditional revenger, except for the burden of his own conscience. So looking at the play as a revenge tragedy. So as you can see, they're quite broad, but they are focused with regards to the theme idea, okay? So no real character questions there, okay? I noted earlier that we were going to have a quick look at sort of devices for dramatic discussion, and this is one aspect of AO2 that's often overlooked or often not really considered in great depth, okay? So we're going to look at devices for dramatic discussion. So the types of devices that we could possibly look at here, okay, are allusion, so a reference to a person, place, event, usually without explicit identification. Could be reference to mythology, Bible, historical events, geography, other literary works. Use allusion to establish a tone, create an implied association, contrast to objects or people, make an unusual juxtaposition of references, or bring the reader into a world of experience outside the limitations of the story itself. Shakespeare's plots are frequently based on legends and historical events. Shakespeare was fond of alluding to mythology, using Antony and Cleopatra, using a lot of his plays, okay? And using imagery is what he often does to kind of illuminate the ideas that he expresses in his allusions, okay? Dramatic devices. So dramatic devices not invented by Shakespeare as a drama would not hold up without them. The plays of Shakespeare's predecessors and contemporaries used them. But one of the reasons that Shakespeare's plays are so gripping and suspenseful is that he was a master of the dramatic device. A dramatic device is anything that drives the action. In Shakespeare's plays, they come one after another, each one following closely on the previous one. So in Macbeth, for example, the witches plant the idea of becoming king in Macbeth's mind, which leads him to raise it with his wife, who encourages him to kill Duncan, which he does. So there are two dramatic devices for a start. So Duncan's arrival at Glamis is another. And then comes the murder of Duncan, an enormous dramatic device, okay, which creates all kinds of movements. It's all about movement and pushing and encouraging the action of the play forward, okay, right until the very last moment of the drama. Okay, this is what we're thinking about here. Also, what we've got is the use of dramatic irony. So a situation that the reader knows something about present or future circumstances that the character does not know. And obviously, when we're thinking of the reader, we're also considering obviously the inclusion of the audience here as well. For example, in Macbeth, when Duncan's murdered body is found, Macbeth behaves as though he's angry, but the audience knows that he is in fact the murderer. Okay, so there you've got dramatic irony. So where he is presenting himself as in one sense for the other actors on stage, the other characters on stage, yet the audience know the truth essentially as well. So Shakespeare's plays are strewn with monologues, a long uninterrupted speech that is spoken in the presence of other characters. Unlike a soliloquy, a monologue is heard by the other characters. A soliloquy then, on the other hand, a speech in which a character who is normally alone on the stage expresses his or her thoughts aloud. A really effective, really powerful device, okay, allows the writer to convey a character's most intimate thoughts and feelings directly to the audience, okay, allows that connection. Okay, the convention is that the audience is allowed to hear the character's thoughts. He or she is not talking but thinking. Shakespeare uses soliloquies liberally so often, and some of his finest pieces of writing are in this form. For example, the to be or not to be soliloquy in Hamlet. Okay, so what we're thinking about here is the impact of the soliloquy. Okay, so why he chooses to use it and the impact that it has on the audience. Okay. Symbolism, again, is really one of the most prominent dramatic devices that are used. So one of his strongest, most distinguishing characteristic, frequent use of words, places, characters or objects that mean something beyond what they are on a literal level. If, for example, a writer uses the word blood once, its meaning will be confined to that instance in which it is used. But if the word is used repeatedly, as it is in plays like Macbeth and Romeo and Juliet, it expresses some profound ideas. Okay, so once, it means what it says what it sort of says on the tin, as in blood. But when it's sort of repeated, like for example in Romeo and Juliet, it sort of expresses a lot of interlocking themes. So in Romeo and Juliet, the blood refers to all the following and more themes. So violence, youth, passion, family ties. In King Lear, the technique it's particularly well developed. So one strand of imagery refers to wild animals with sharp teeth, talons, claws. And that definitely reflects the savage and cruel way the members of the younger generation treat their elders. And it shows clear images of the pain that both Lear and Gloucester suffer in the play, okay? So symbolism is a really important one to consider. Okay, so we'll have a look now at section A. So here what we've got are some commentary from the examiners, okay? And they state that several candidates were obviously quite unfamiliar with the extract, okay, possibly seeing this part of the text for the very first time and therefore responding to it as if it was an unseen extract. So many good responses where perceptive analysis and evaluation are offered for O2 rather than just a list of literary devices. And that's something that we've spoken about in every session, is just this need and this desire to make sure that you're not just listing, oh, there's use of simile or there's use of metaphor. You have to say what the purpose of it is and what the author is trying to do in their inclusion of it. Stating that there's no need to go into some excessively long discussion of every line of the extract, so be precise, be specific. What is the meaning here? How is it being shaped? So how is it being created? is something that needs to be considered by you guys, by you candidates. Many struggle to understand the significance of the situation that the characters find themselves in. A clear lack of knowledge, understanding form and structure were demonstrated, and sort of not reading in accordance with punctuation. Okay, so misinterpreting the meaning of the whole sentence by looking at, say, an opening phrase in isolation. So you've got to read with Shakespeare sort of from, you know, the start of the sentence to like the next punctuation mark. Okay, that's what's important. Okay, so just looking at language, as you can see, okay, there's a number of words that have been highlighted here. So Albany says, wisdom and goodness, the vile seem vile, filth savour but themselves. What have you done? Tigers, not daughters, what have you performed? A father and a gracious aged man, whose reverence even the head-legged bear would lick, most barbarous, most degenerated, have you madded? Could my good brother suffer you to do it, a man, a prince by him so benefited? If that the heavens do not their visible spirits send quickly down to tame these vile offences, it will come. Humanity must perforce prey on itself like monsters of the deep. So look at the words that have been highlighted or coloured, okay? So you've got some real conflicting imagery being presented here. You've got the idea of wisdom and goodness and the vile filths, okay, barbarous, degenerate. You've got the use of gracious, and what's being posed are two different groups of people, okay? The monstrous aspect, okay, the kind of the idea that praying, and then the sort of wise, good, inherently good aspect as well. Okay, so look at the conflicting imagery. But what's important is that you read, like I said, from the start of a sentence to the end of the punctuation mark. So, for example, if that the heavens do not their visible spirits send quickly down to tame these vile offences. So you have to read that as a line. Otherwise, if you're looking at it as a phrase sort of standalone, it loses its impact, okay? Because obviously the line runs on there. So read through the following extract from Hamlet, okay? So now I am alone. Oh, what a rogue and peasant slave am I. It is not monstrous that this player here, but in a fiction, in a dream of passion, could force his soul so to his own conceit that from her working all his visage waned. Tears in his eyes, distraction in his aspect, a broken voice, and his whole function suiting with forms to his conceit. And all for nothing, for Hecuba. Was Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her? What would he do? Had he the motive and the cue for passion that I have? Okay, so that extract there, okay, what we need to take from there is the repeated use of the exclamatives, clever use of sentence structure there, okay. The constant use of questioning shows this sort of mindset that Hamlet is in at this point, okay. As we know, he states with that opening line, now I am alone, okay, so we know that this is one of his soliloquies. Okay, and we see that he is sort of going back and forth here. He seems to be in some state of sort of turmoil, and that's definitely reflected through the use of the rhetorical questions and the use of the exclamatives as well, okay? And you see that he seems to be quite uncertain and quite uneasy. So if we have a look here at what's been highlighted, okay, so the light blue, so how does the word patterning in these opening lines help the reader audience to access the meaning? So things like we've got player, fiction, dream, conceit, cue, okay? So idea of something which is made up, okay? Something which is being presented, something which possibly lacks reality, okay? What these keywords says about Hamlet and how he sees himself, so rogue, peasant, slave, so very negative assumptions being made about himself here, okay, and again note the phrasing provided by the punctuation, okay, so like I was mentioning, the punctuation, the constant use of the comma, the semicolon, okay, need to be considered, the use of the questioning, And with the linking with the opening phrase, it is not monstrous, this player here. Okay, so almost as though what you're getting in this is this real sense of disillusion from Hamlet at this point. And here's a little task for you to do in your own time, okay? So you've got Lear here. So let the great gods that keep this dreadful put over our heads find out their enemies now. Tremble, thou wretch, that hast within thee undivulged crimes and whipped of justice. Hide thee, thou bloody hand, thou perjured and thou similar man of virtue, thou that art incestuous. Caitiff to pieces shake that under covert and convenient semen has practised on man's life. Close pent-up guilt, rive your concealing continence and cry these dreadful summoners grace. I am a man more sinned against than sinning. So look at whether there's a pattern of keywords or key imagery being presented here. Read the punctuation and find the main clauses in the sentences which carry the essential meaning, the essential ideas, and look at if there's a pattern to the opening words of each new sentence, okay, and what do they signify, okay? So you've got tremble, hide thee, okay, close, pent up, okay, a man more sinned. So look at what sort of the ideas that are being expressed in the way those sentences are opening, what they mean, okay? So that's something you can think about and have a look at this extract as well. So when you're preparing for the Shakespeare extract, some things that you possibly could do a bit of practice. So knowledge and understanding of the sequence of events in the play is really important, it's vital. Okay, what we don't want is that you are given an extract and you're really unfamiliar with it, okay? You're not quite sure where to place it. Okay, so to prepare, you should kind of just look at random passages of text on a regular basis and arrange them in a chronological order, okay, from the play. Place the relevant passages by identifying what happened before and what will happen next. So be able to put them into some kind of context within the play. And then to be able to understand how the extract of text works within the wider context. Okay, it really is important for you to understand meaning and just to become more familiar with the text so that when you broach your extract questions, there's a lot more confidence being presented then. Okay, so as this is a play and therefore a performance text, it is important to remember that there's an intended audience and dramatic techniques or effects are key to Shakespeare's presentation, okay? So even if there are no stage directions, Shakespeare conveys dramatic impact through things such as language and imagery, so be it monologues, soliloquy or dialogue. Effects such as dramatic irony, for example, when Prospero speaks in Asides and the Tempest, and dramatic tension should be considered where relevant. If the given extract, and this obviously applies to your essay as well, okay? If the given extract involves more than one character, consider the dramatic contribution of other characters in the scene, providing they have bearing on how the question is framed, okay? For example, responding to a question on the presentation of Lear, we might say that Kent's speech is important in reinforcing the vulnerability of Lear as he faces a storm. Lack bareheaded, and his speech also reminds the audience of Lear's circumstances of being cast out of doors and exposed to the elements, so this hard house. The mention of this dreadful pudder creates a dramatic effect of the storm for the audience with or without staging and sound effects, okay? Obviously, what we find often with some Shakespeare texts, and is definitely present in Hamlet as well, is that the stage directions are quite minimal and you find out it's almost as though he's kind of leaving hints or clues what the staging would be through the lines of the characters, okay? So make sure that you're reading because that will most definitely allow for you to sort of gauge more understanding with regards to meaning, okay? And then if we look at section B, so the essay, so what makes a good literary essay? So engagement with the text and the task, developed and sustained argument being presented, a supported argument which has integrated contextual material and integrated critical views, okay? And that word integrated is what's important, okay? So engagement is vital. You need to be able to signal from the beginning that you are addressing both the play and the task, okay? So like I said, what do we understand by integrated? Okay, the essay must be cohesive and clearly engage with the text and the task. So any contextual discussion and critical discussion should only serve to enhance the central argument and help to develop it. The purpose of the critical and contextual readings is to add to your own argument, okay? The argument that you're creating in light of the question that's been given to you. The purpose of the critical readings, the purpose of the contextual readings that you're going to be referencing should just develop and illuminate your argument rather than provide something separate entirely, okay? So the Shakespeare essay, so note from the principal examiner's report. So in the essay task, AO3 is double weighted, okay? We mentioned that earlier at 30 marks, yet a number of candidates are still not addressing the context correctly. So approaches to AO3 range from a token gesture of acknowledging context to a distracting chunk of narrative or descriptive relating of context with little or no application or relevance to the question. And that is the issue. It's got to be relevant to the question that you've chosen to answer on. Okay, the most successful responses integrate discussion about contextual significance into their argument, not merely presenting it as a standalone comment of questionable relevance. Some candidates see the value of literary context in enriching their arguments, and this obviously constitutes a positive step forwards. It definitely is important to give careful consideration to all elements of the question. Okay, so particularly if the question asks you to what extent do you agree, okay, candidates must resist the urge to adapt the question to respond to the one aspect they hoped would come up, okay? So if you've got kind of a stock question in mind in your head, don't sort of tailor what's being given to you in light of the one that you did in class a couple of weeks prior to that, okay? And as has been noted in previous years, overuse of the word arguably in the belief that this is enough to address AO5, okay? You need to make sure that you're looking at what critics are actually saying, okay? Don't simply just say some critics. If you know that there is a feminist reading, if you know there's a historical reading, and you can quote it, okay, then that's what's better, okay? If you've got some named critical readings that you can possibly implement, obviously in relation to your argument in the course of your response. So example answers here, okay, so here what we're looking at is where is then the evidence of engagement with the text and task? How does response to begin to target AO3 and AO5, okay, so we'll have a read of this. So Shakespeare's presentation of Hamlet's society in Denmark is first shown in Act 1, where it is described as a rotten state of Denmark, which presents it as both a dirty and corrupt country. Rotten could be used to describe the atmosphere between the people and classes within Denmark at the time of the corruption within the courts. It could also be a link to Elizabethan society, as some suggest Shakespeare was mirroring his society onto Denmark in order to make comments about things such as Queen Elizabeth's network of spies without directly relating it to her or England. Another interpretation is that Shakespeare was just trying to use a description of Denmark to foreshadow the events from the play and provide the audience with some clues. Okay, so here you've got another interpretation. Okay, so definitely bringing in your AO5, okay, so considering a different reading of it. It could also be a link, okay, could also, so that tentative language, but most definitely showing an awareness of AO3 and AO5, and focusing initially though on the question and this idea of corruption that's being presented in Hamlet and in Denmark, okay. Shakespeare can be seen to have written the play with his Christian audience in mind. For example, Lear saying very early in the play, "Know that we have divided our kingdom," would have had a significant impact on his audience, as the succession crisis would have been fresh in their minds due to Elizabeth I never marrying or having children. So a Jacobin audience who would have been Christian would have been aware that Lear's idea was foolish. However, all of this would have resonated with the Jacobin audience. Many critics, such as Huxley, believe that the setting the play in Christian times would have been a dangerous act due to having Christian characters such as Lear portrayed as a flaw with hubris. Okay, so there's one approach here. And then it continues then, however, many of the characters in King Lear can be seen as upholding Christian values. This can be seen by Cordelia and Edgar, who Paul W. Kahn argues are Christian characters trapped in a pagan world, exemplified through Edgar's faith in a divine shown through the line, the gods are just, presenting the character to have unwavering faith through the certainty of the words. This can also be seen in Cordelia, who appears to be a symbol of hope and virtue. This can be argued through her association with light, as when she leaves, we are left darkling. As the fool says, out goes the light, perhaps due to Cordelia leaving. Okay, so again, what you've got is definitely the inclusion of AO2 and the use of AO2 to drive the argument. And then you've got the AO3 and the AO5 being used effectively to develop that sense of argument. Again, what we've got here is just, you can have a read through that. You can see that AO1, AO2 and AO5 have been sort of picked out for you, okay? Obviously something that we would need to think about is where would we put the AO3 in here, okay? So this is something that you can do as well yourselves, okay? If you're familiar with Tempest, you can maybe think about where would you put the AO3 in and how would you weave that into this response, okay? But definitely what you've got here is a really focused response. Okay, definitely looking at alternative arguments and other viewpoints, but using the task and using the text to drive the response, okay, and that's what's really effective here. Here we'll just quickly look at some of the problems that have been raised in the past by examiners, okay. So the fact that candidates definitely need to take a bit more time to consider what the question is asking. So I said at the beginning to make sure you've got time to plan, okay? You need to make sure you're aware of what the assessment objectives are, okay, and how they're being targeted in this question, okay? So you've got to appreciate the 15, 15, 30, 15 sort of split across the assessment objectives, but you need to ensure you have that, say, 5-10 minutes or so at the beginning in order to plan your response, to get your ideas organised and structured, okay? So in order to facilitate candidates being able to address all relevant AO's questions being carefully phrased to ensure a focused discussion, the extracts proved to sort candidates out quite sharply into those who had read their play in depth, either in class or at home, and those who had presumably only familiarised themselves with some of the big speeches. You need to really practice analysing speeches closely. You need to think about extend the range of contexts, okay? So look at literary and cultural context a little more as well. So general commentary then with regards to the paper. So where responses were successful, they generally featured a really good knowledge and understanding of the text, so appropriate support from and references to the play, a really clear engagement with critical views, usually put to good purpose, considered approaches to the integration of context, so AO3, and other interpretations, so AO5, which definitely enhance the argument in the response, and accurate and coherent expression. And then the less successful, so this is like the kind of to do and not to do list essentially. So insecure knowledge of the text, definitely in the extract question that's shown. Poorly constructed sentences and paragraphs, okay. Making sweeping sort of statements and generalizations when looking at context, retelling the plot, okay, and that's one thing that happens often in this question, okay. You have to remind yourself that the people marking your papers, the examiners, they know these plays inside out, okay. You don't need to tell them what's happening, you don't need to give them an overview, okay, you don't need to give them the background, they know the plot, okay. You need to answer your question, okay, you need to make sure that you are engaging with the entirety of the question that's been given to you as well, okay. So here what we've got then is a response to setting, which asks to look at Shakespeare's use of the supernatural and elements of magic in his writing of The Tempest. So if we just read a couple of the opening pages, okay, and you'll see that this is a really clever, intellectual, perceptive response, and it would definitely do you well to look at the way that this particular candidate has structured their argument, okay. So in The Tempest, the island setting, the use of magic and the supernatural are each facets exploited by Shakespeare that, whilst providing us as the audience with an entertaining spectacle, often are irreplaceable and an irreplaceable contribution to the play. As John Fletcher has observed, The Tempest allocates equal portions of both mirth and killing to all the protagonists and antagonists within the play. Being an intricate work of tragic comedy, the mystical elements functioning over the course of The Tempest enabled Shakespeare to explore the desires harboured in his characters in the most recesses. From the outset in Act 1, Scene 1, the use of magic serves in a capacity that surpasses the entertainment. The tempestuous noise of thunder and lightning that threatens to split the ship carrying company of Alonso, using the acts as a central metaphor for the intrinsic disturbance in the great chain of being, an Elizabethan concept that designated a designated individual a rooted station in the social hierarchy determined by their lineage. Through pathetic fallacies, looking at techniques, looking at context, looking at other people's viewpoints and their approaches, okay? Through pathetic fallacy, Shakespeare foreshadows how the great chain of being has been distorted within the context of the play, though a contemporary audience would inextricably associate this tumultuous natural disaster with such a notion. It becomes apparent for any audience. Okay, so considering the impact or the impression of the audience as well is really important. Okay, so this response continues in the same sort of light, okay, over another couple of pages. Lovely textual support, really specific, really precise textual evidence being shown, okay, interweaves and definitely includes some really effective contextual and critical readings to support the reading, okay, and in the end, if we just get to the last page, what you find, okay, it's quite a lengthy response, what you find, okay, is that through commenting on things like monologue, dramatic device, technique, definitely looking at the AO3 and AO5 in depth, what you've got is a full marks response. Okay, so every single AO, this candidate was awarded full marks. Okay, so when it comes to the structure and the way that this candidate seems to sort of, without any great sort of struggle, seems to weave nicely and effortlessly the AO3 and the AO5 into their argument. Okay, it's something that you really need to consider. Okay, well, thank you very much, Year 13. Best of luck to you in the future, and hopefully you will all get the grades that you deserve, and good luck to you in university or in jobs if that's your course. Take care. Thank you.